Hello everyone and welcome to the Sky channel. So this is going to be about the best build for Berserker, which essentially starts from the Axe Warrior, Warmonger, and Warbringer. And in this video we are going to go over the class active skill, the class passive skills, your selectable skills, your pals, your relics, your souls, your mounts, fruit bonuses you can get, your equipment, artifacts, tech park focuses, and at the end I'll talk about how you can actually save money on in-game purchases in the game. Now before we get started, I do want to talk about how I came to make this video. So I knew there was a significant demand for these sort of best classes and best builds, but I never felt comfortable creating a video about it until I got enough experience and enough knowledge to try to back that up. So I spent hours and hours looking into the skills, what their specialties are about, trying to understand it and link it with the different things like pals, skills, and how you can make an overall highly cohesive selection of different things that would make your account extremely powerful. I also did certain tests during the live simulator event to see how those things work together, and of course significant research, and I went through Discord as well and I found amazing guides from other players. I think I went through 4 of them, and that was extremely helpful because that made sure that the way I'm thinking is aligned with what other people are thinking as well. Only then did I feel comfortable creating a video on it and putting it on my channel. That being said, there might be things that me and a lot of other people weren't able to figure out. If that's the case, do go ahead and use the comment section and be like, you know what, I think I differ from your opinion in this particular thing. And that's how we can use the power of community to ensure even more opinions and perspectives are brought into play. I also recommend everyone else to go into the comment section to see what other people have to say and if they have any disagreement with anything that has been mentioned in the video that you should be aware of. That being said, I believe that this is fairly accurate, and of course I will go through it with you and it's gonna start to make sense for you yourself. Without further ado, let's get started. So we are talking about the Berserker class line, and that includes all of these, and Warbringer is the final evolution of that class. Now let's go to Berserker and try to understand what's so unique about it. When you go into it, you see that the info section gives you certain information like defense, counter, and counter damage seems to be what the game recommends when you are using this class. Now when you go to the final evolution, it also adds attack to it. Let's not dig too deep into this right now, and let's start talking about the active skill. So the active skill deals 3742% damage, and that's area effect damage, and increases the counter damage received by targets within the range by 60%, which lasts for 5 seconds. Now this is pointing towards the first important thing that you should know, and that is counter damage is getting increased. And as you'll soon learn, counter damage happens to be the most important thing for this class. Now as you evolve further and reach Warbringer, the damage goes up substantially to 8419% area effect, and the counter damage increases by 60% and lasts for 8 seconds. Additionally, you do launch targets into the air when you counter them within 5 seconds of releasing this skill. I'm not particularly sure if that's useful, given that you are all about doing damage by countering. So you want to make sure that they are attacking you consistently, and when they attack you, you do a huge amount of damage back to them. That's what Berserkers are all about. But that will make more sense as we start talking about the passive skills. The first one says that you get a 30% additional chance of doing counter damage, and also a counter multiplier of plus 30%. And essentially think of it as a way of measuring how much damage you're going to do each counter. So counter multiplier, the higher the better, because that means you do more damage every time you counter. The second part gives you additional defense, which is helpful to help you live longer. The third one is saying counter damage plus 140%. Now think of this for a second. You have a high chance of doing counter damage because of this skill. You have a higher counter multiplier, which increases the damage that you do per counter. Now you're getting additional counter damage of 140%, And if you look up here, you also get an extra 60% counter damage anytime somebody attacks you within 5 seconds of releasing your active skill. Pretty cool, right? You can see how all the counters are adding up. And that's what makes all the difference. Next up, you reflect 80% of basic attack damage when you get hit. So we were talking about the counters, and now you're also reflecting damage every time you get hit. And as you can imagine, this is adding up. Now when you go to the Warbringer, that goes up to 160% of basic attack damage when hit. You can probably see how that is a lot of damage we're already talking about. And finally, the fifth passive skill, increase attack by 3% for every 10% of health lost. Which means that if you lost 50% of your health, you get an extra 15% attack, which is helpful. And if you go down to only 10% of your health remaining, you are talking 27% extra attack. Really cool, right? Okay, so that covers the active and passive skills. And that should also tell you a little bit about this class. You are not highly focused on doing a lot of skill damage. You're not highly focused on doing normal attack damage. You are all about enemies attacking you and you countering them and doing a bunch of damage to them every time they actually attack you. And that's the way you go. So you want to live long enough. You want to have a high enough health that when people attack you, they're actually attacking themselves back as well. And of course, you want them to be defeated before you. So that's what this class essentially focuses on. And you'll notice how everything else we cover in this video is going to be revolving somewhat around this concept. If you've understood this concept already, you're in a very good shape to understand everything else we're going to talk in this video. Now let's start talking about your choosable skills. Ignore the ones that I have at the top, those have no relevance to this video. Let's start talking about Shroom Shield. Now Shroom Shield is very interesting. It deals some damage and then you get a shield that is equal to 20% of your maximum HP and it lasts for 10 seconds. 19 seconds later, you can get the shield again. Now remember the concept we were talking about in the beginning. We're all about having enough health to survive and do enough counter damage to the enemy. And you can already see how having an extra 20% health coming to you multiple times in the battle can be an extremely valuable way of you continuing to survive long enough to do enough counter damage to the enemy. So this is definitely a very valuable skill. And I believe it holds significance even throughout the end game. The other one I want to talk about is Nature's Renewal. This is also very interesting because it deals a certain amount of damage to the enemy and then you recover 30% of the max HP within 5 seconds. Now you may think this is wonderful too because it just sits so well. The only negative thing I can think of is the fact that it has a 25 seconds refresh time, and you know what? The first time it releases, if you're using the shield as well, it actually gets wasted in the auto release because it's going to start healing itself when your health is already full and you potentially have a shield on as well. So it completely gets wasted and sometimes, you may never get the chance to release it again because the war will almost be over. That's what can make this less useful, and in my opinion, the Shroom Shield actually ends up being a little bit more helpful. Next up, Easy Breezy. Now this does some area effect damage and reduces the attack of your enemies within the range by 20% and lasts for 5 seconds. This is helpful because reducing the attack of your enemy means that you can increase your survivability. Okay, Smoke Bomb. Now Smoke Bomb does some area effect damage and then increases the damage within the range by 30% for 5 seconds. This is also helpful because of the fact that you'll be doing more damage and more counter damage to the enemy for the 5 seconds after you release that skill. Blitz Assault, it does a high amount of damage and then gives you 3 seconds of damage immunity, which is helpful because it means that the enemy can't harm you during those 3 seconds. And you know what? You have a shield coming up soon, so reducing the chance of you dying before that shield comes up is always helpful. The Blade Pierce skill does a reasonably high amount of damage and then actually drains 1.5% of maximum HP of the enemy per second for 5 seconds. Now you are not all about having a huge amount of attack, so being able to take 7.5% of the enemy's health regardless of you having potentially a very low amount of attack is definitely helpful. Now, Clone Strike seems to be an overpowered skill. It generates a clone with 30% of your health, and it lasts for 10 seconds and deals 200% damage with each basic attack. Now it's increasing your survivability because, well, you got 30% extra health, and then it's also dealing damage to the enemy, which is amazing as well. And one thing that's unconfirmed, but I've heard some people say it, is that the clone can also do counter damage. If that's the case, this is potentially the most overpowered skill out there. Next up, 100 Slashes. It deals a high amount of damage and then gets you an extra 20% basic attack damage resistance, which means you're probably going to live longer, and you get a 0.5% attack bonus based on your current health. Now, they don't mention how much attack you're going to get, like how does it relate to your health, but my assumption is possibly something similar than that passive skill, which gives you attack based on how low health you have. If that's the case, the extra attack is helpful. It'll add up to your active skill. Now, Crimson Moonfall deals a lot of damage because the first time it deals a little bit, but the next time the damage increases by 50% and it can stack up to 3 times, making it extremely powerful after it's been stacked. And it releases every 8 seconds, so you can see how that can be an extremely high damage dealer. Now, it doesn't have too much synergy with our class, but it is more like a helpful skill for pretty much all classes. The synergy that I can see is that you can last long enough to release it several times, making it potentially very powerful. Finally, I'm going to talk about Whirly Snare. A very high amount of damage and then increases crit rate by 10%. For every 1% of your crit rate, you gain an additional 3% crit damage, and it lasts for 5 seconds. Now, why is this helpful? Well, the secret is that counter attacks can crit as well. Pretty cool, right? Now imagine if you are focusing on doing a lot of damage to counters, and then you can get that extra criticals to do even more damage. You can see how that can be very helpful. Okay, so that gives you a bunch of options to choose from. I would recommend that you do keep at least the Shroom Shield with you while you probably focus on the other pink skills because they deal a ton of damage, and you can also see how they can help you with your build. Okay, next we're going to talk about pals, and this is where it gets very interesting because of the way pals' abilities work. And I'm going to start with the best pal in my opinion, and that is the Electric Pup. Now, it being a pink pal means that it already has a pretty high damage multiplier and attack speed, but look at the deploy effect. Increases counter damage by 60%. That should be music to your ears already, right? Because we're all about counter damage, and it's giving us 60% extra, making it a must-have for this class. But wait a minute. It also says that it restores 1% of your lost health every time you counter. It can't really get better than this. You're increasing the amount of damage you do every counter, and then you're also getting back a bunch of health every time you counter, so you live longer and you can do even more counters. Amazing, right? This is built for this class. So make sure you do try to get this, and once you get it, make sure it's always in your selection. Next, we're going to talk about the Hipster Tortoise. Again, a pretty high damage and a pretty high attack speed, but look at the deploy effect. When your health falls below 50%, gain a shield equal to 30% of your max HP, with a cooldown of 60 seconds before you can release this again. Think of it like a little bit of a stronger Shroom Shield, right? You get 30% of your health back instead of 20, and remember, if you have a shield, you can counter while you have that shield on. And that's what makes this so overpowered, because you want to live longer, and shields make you live longer because they're giving you pretty much 30% or 20% extra health based on if it's Hipster Tortoise or Shroom Shield, and then you're doing counters during your shield activation. Really cool. So this is definitely another one that you should always have in your unit. Next, let's talk about Kung Fu Master. Now, this is a red pal, so the damage multiplier and attack speed are a little less than the pink ones, but the deploy effect is that you get an extra 40% health regeneration. Now, for those of you who don't know what the HP regeneration is, it doesn't mean that it starts healing you because you have this pal in your unit. It is increasing the effect of healing, and the healing that we're talking in this context is the healing you get from a special stat called regeneration. We're going to cover this stat when we start talking about gear. But essentially, if you have a decent amount of regeneration, Kung Fu Master becomes extremely valuable to have because it is increasing the amount of regeneration. And the way regeneration works is that it heals you every second of battle by a certain amount. And that is separate from the nature's renewal skill that we talked about earlier. So you're getting a bunch of health back every second. And when you have this Kung Fu Master, you get even more health back every second, making it extremely helpful because you want to live longer. And this is helping you live longer by recovering extra health. Next up, Warlord Hydra Sprite. Now this doesn't necessarily have a high synergy with your class, but it is something that's helpful for all classes. Why is that so? Because active skill energy regeneration goes up by 25% when you deploy this. What does that mean? That means that the skills that we talked about a little while ago are going to release more often. So you'll be doing a bunch of damage more often, and you'll also be getting that shield back more often. Very important and very helpful. I would probably keep this in your unit at all times as well. Finally, the Angel Deer. And essentially the helpful thing about this is that it resists the damage that you take, allowing you to live longer, and longer battles are helpful for you because of the way the class works and you get more shields and all that stuff. So this is also a helpful pal to use. Now, this doesn't mean that the other pals are not helpful. There is the Wealthy Lizard, which gives you an extra pal damage and potentially can help you a lot as well. But these are the ones that I felt had the most synergy with your class, and hence I recommend that you use them. You'll also notice that there is the overall effects that you can see here. Base attack, base health, and base defense are going up by a certain amount. These are passive. So you don't need to deploy a certain pal to get them. You just need to make sure that you continue to enhance your pals whenever you can, and you can see that effect go up. This is also the same in your skills. As you can see, whenever I enhance all of them, it actually increases. Next up, we're going to be talking about relics. And the first one is the mask. And we're going to try to get the Ironclad mask because it gives an extra 10% chance to counter. The only time I would say that this is not that important is if your chance to counter is already very high. Because if you are close to 100% counter chance, the extra 10% is not going to help you much. In that case, you could probably go for the Bonded Mask, which gives you an extra 10% crit rate because counters can crit. Next, the blue relics, I would probably say that the Dragonweave Circlet is fairly helpful because you have a turtle that I have recommended, and giving it a 20% chance to deal 0.5% of their own maximum health as damage seems to be fairly useful. And then we go to the purple one, and probably the magic box, which increases the damage of your deer by 16.33%, which can help you in battle. Then we go to our books, and here you can see that the Flame Book gives you an extra 1% attack per second, and it stacks up to 10%. You are probably going to live longer than 10 seconds, so an extra 10% attack throughout the rest of the battle definitely seems to be extremely helpful. Finally, the orange relics, I'd probably go with this one because you do have your Shroom Shield, and increasing the damage of it by 30% is fairly helpful. And if you also have Nature's Renewal, then this is sort of helping two of your skills, and that's obviously great. Finally, the red relics. The Crimson Sickle Necklace seems to be fairly helpful because you are probably going to be using Blade Pierce, and when you release it, you get 2.5% of your max health back, which means you live longer and do more counter damage. Now, if you decided to use Wild Gust 2, which is a reasonably good skill as well, you have 2 opportunities to restore your health, which is pretty amazing. Now, I don't have the last relic unlocked. I think I'm missing just 2 more relics before I can unlock it, but you get the idea that anything that has to do with either counter damage, or if not that, critical rate, or if it's something to do with pals or skills, anything that links to your pal or your skill is what you should probably be focusing on. Okay, next up are the souls. And as you can imagine, the counter damage soul is probably the most helpful and should probably be the one that you upgrade the most. Now, I know sometimes you're hesitant to upgrade the souls, but keep in mind that if you get a red soul of this in the future, you can simply salvage this and you get back 100% of whatever you spent in upgrading it, plus whatever you were going to get because it's a yellow soul. So don't hesitate in upgrading it if you have a yellow or purple. The moment you get a higher rarity, you can just salvage that and use it all on your hopefully red soul. So of course, it's no surprise that the counter damage is the best soul out there for you. Now there is also an ability to fuse 2 red souls to make an even better soul. And this is called the Excellent Companion, which gives you the counter damage that you're getting from the red soul, but it also adds pal damage to the equation if you fuse it with the pal damage red soul. So think of taking 2 souls and putting them together into one. Of course, that will always be better than a single soul by itself. This is one that I probably recommend you try to get because increasing your pal damage means that you're doing more damage to the enemy, which is helpful. And of course, you're getting the counter damage along with it. So it should be no surprise that the health soul is also very helpful. You want to live longer so that you can deal more damage to the enemy through counters, and that's why having a higher health is very important. Now the health soul also has the ability to fuse to make the immortal spirit soul. And how that works is that you fuse a red health soul with a red health regeneration soul. And it is quite amazing because you're getting health and you're also getting extra health regeneration. And if you are able to get this soul, you're going to end up living much longer because you're also increasing the amount of health you get back using regeneration. And of course, you should probably be using the Kung Fu Panda along with this to make that health regeneration really high. Finally, the attack soul is also very helpful because you want to be able to do more damage, and it of course also has a fusion that you should probably look into. Okay, let's start talking about the mounts now. Mount upgrades are obviously very helpful because they give you huge jumps in your health, attack, and defense, and also increase your evasion. Although evasion isn't necessarily a very helpful stat for your class. That being said, you can also empower your mounts, and that can give you extra pal damage, extra skill damage, and extra basic attack damage. I would probably go for the basic attack damage as a priority among these 3. But the more interesting thing is that you can also advance your mounts, and each of them give you certain attributes that may be fairly helpful for you. Now the Firebreaker is fairly helpful as well. It allows you to ignore evasion so the enemies can't dodge you as much, but also gives you an extra skill which increases your crit rate by 1% and crit damage by 5% per second, and it stacks. So you can go up to 20% extra crit rate and 100% extra crit damage, and of course that impacts your counters as well. This also happens to be fairly cheap to get because you only require 10 Skyrider passes to obtain this. Now going to the more expensive options, the White Tiger is very helpful as well. It increases your basic attack damage by 10%, and if you have more health than the enemy, you're going to be able to do 15% more damage to them, and if you have less health than the enemy, you're going to take in less damage as well, making it fairly helpful. But let's jump directly to the best mount for your class, and that is the mini motorcycle. First off, it's giving you a 10% extra health, which, as you all know by now, is very important because you want to live longer. But look at the extra mount skill. With every counter, you increase your global counter damage by 10% for 3 seconds, and it stacks up to a maximum of 30%, but the duration actually refreshes on every new counter, which means that if you do very frequent counters, you can keep that 30% counter damage boost throughout the end of the battle. Extremely helpful, of course, along with the fact that you're getting the extra health, allowing you to live longer. So definitely the best mount that you can get for this class. Okay, next we're going to talk about the bonuses that you can get from your fruits. Now, as you can imagine, the best thing for you to get is global counter damage, and you probably want to roll all of them as global counter damage, which is indeed possible, as you can see on the screen right now. Fun fact, I don't actually have this. This is the magic of Photoshop. But the point is that you can actually get this. And of course, the more counter damage that you have, the better it is for you. That being said, if you want to get something else, like a little bit of extra health and critical rate is also okay. But of course, I would try to prioritize getting as much global counter damage as possible. Okay, now we're going to go to the equipment. Now you probably know there's the rainbow equipment and then there's the gold equipment, and all of those give you a certain amount of health, attack, and defense. And that's great, of course. But there comes a time when you want to start focusing on the attributes more than you care about the health, attack, and defense. Of course, that doesn't mean you should be carrying around a blue equip while most of your other equips are rainbow. But it does mean that if possible, try to get the attributes that are helpful for your class. Now in your case, that would probably be the counter-strike percentage, as you want to get as high counter-strike percentage as possible up to a certain amount, beyond which of course the extra counter-strike is not going to be as helpful. Because as it goes, increasing your counter chance from a 0% to 5% is definitely much more helpful than increasing it from 95% to 100%. So you need to decide when you want to put it to a stop, like maybe 70 or 80%. And after that, perhaps focus a little bit on other attributes that might be helpful as well. And we talk about what other attributes are helpful. That's when we start bringing up the topic of regeneration that we talked about earlier. So you can see down here it says 0.17% regeneration, which means you get 0.17% of your health back every second. So having this at a very high point means that you can regenerate a bunch of your health back every second, and then you bring in the panda and the souls and the other things to actually increase that amount, allowing you to live much longer. So personally, I feel that having a focus on Counter-Strike and regeneration can be pretty helpful, because you are focusing on doing a lot of damage to the enemies using your counters, and then you're healing yourself at a substantial rate as well, allowing you to live longer and do more counters. Critical rate is also particularly helpful because, as we mentioned before, your counters can crit. Next up, artifacts. And similar to mounts, artifacts give you a bunch of health, attack, and defense bonuses, which are very helpful. They also give the ability to ignore evasion, which is helpful if the enemy has a very high level mount. This is like the counter to mounts, so they can't dodge you as often. But if you go to the morph section, you can see that there are certain special artifacts that you can equip. And I feel the Candy Gatling seems to be a very helpful one. So basic attacks, combos, and counters unleash between 1 to 5 bullets, and each bullet does 10% of current basic attack damage to the enemy, which means up to 50% of current basic attack damage is done every time you counter or do basic attacks. And hopefully you're going to do a lot of counters, so you can see why this is very helpful. The other thing is it's giving you an extra 10% global attack, which is very helpful as well. There's also the Spring Cord that was recently released, and it seems to be doing a decent amount of damage to the enemy every 11 seconds and confuses them such that every time they do certain attacks like basic attacks, skills, and counter strikes, they're going to deal 20% of the current basic damage to themselves. And this lasts for 5 seconds, which is helpful because if you remember, that is somewhat of what you do as well. Every time you take damage, you do damage to them, and this is doing something similar, so I do feel that this can stack and help out a lot. It also gives the 10% attack that the Candy Gatling was giving. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. Let's talk about the Tech Park. Now, the Tech Park should not be ignored. It is very helpful and grants you major boosts in your stats, and that includes your health, your attack, and your defense. Of course, I'd probably say that having a higher health is the most important, so try to focus on getting as much health as possible through the Tech Park. And as you can see, the numbers are quite impressive. That's a lot of health you can get from the Tech Park, so do not ignore it. And since I still have you here, I want you to know that you can get between 10 to 35% bonuses on in-game purchases in The Legend of Mushroom, meaning that anytime you purchase any pack in the game, you get 10 to 35% of that back as credits, which you can then use to purchase additional packs. And the cherry on the top is that on April 12th and April 26th, you're going to get an extra 5% bonus, which means that at the very minimum, you're going to get a 15% bonus. The process is fairly simple. I have a very detailed video that you can follow, and I'm going to link it to this video. It's going to be in the description, and I'll also create a card that will link you to it so you can decide how you want to watch it. If you want to have a longer conversation before switching to Aptoide, feel free to join our Discord channel and ask me questions there. Okay, so to summarize, the Berserker or Warbringer class is all about counter damage. You want to live long enough and do a lot of counter damage to the enemy and defeat them using the ability to deal damage when they deal damage to you. Having a high health is particularly helpful because you want to live longer, and having a huge focus on counter, so increasing the probability that you do trigger a counter every time the enemy attacks you, and a very high counter damage is very helpful in order to defeat the enemies. If you liked the video, please share it with your friends. Please like the video itself and comment below letting me know if you liked it and if you want additional videos on different classes, and also if you disagree with certain things I've talked about. Check out our channel because there are other Legend of Mushroom videos that you might find helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.